Hey, it's Soul, and we're back with another Zekvir guide, this time covering the tougher version. What's changed and how can you handle it as ranged or melee? We'll cover that because I couldn't kill it as a healer or a tank yet, bummer, but the rules are mostly the same. By the end, you'll have the knowledge needed to complete the encounter, and all that's left is practice, maybe a little bit of regearing. Please like the video if it turns out useful, subscribe for more WoW coverage, and catch me live where I'm streaming. This is an intermediate guide that assumes you defeated the regular version of Zekvir and you're already familiar with most of his abilities and how to use Bran. Let's start by talking about the changes. He's got a lot more life, like more than double. The egg he spawns also has more HP. His melee attacks are brutal on tanks and only slightly manageable on non-tanks and cloud people, but keep in mind non-tanks can get crit. The cast times of his AoE abilities has been reduced, making it a little bit harder to dodge shockwaves, lines, and the AoE. You can make up for it with speed enchants or talent selections that increase your run speed. He now will cast a self-heal called Regenerating Carapace, making this the new spell that must be interrupted at every cast. That means you need to handle Enfeebling Spittle through a cleanse or immunity, while also relying on Bran to kick it or cleanse it off you after every other cast. Shown on screen is a mostly complete list on how each class can handle it because, well, now you have no choice. At 60%, the boss will cast Black Blood and start a new phase. During this time, if you can cast heals, you might want to top yourself off as well as Bran. In this new phase, there are some new abilities and changes. Unending Spines will spawn brown swirlies on the ground that blow up after about 2 seconds, so don't be there. As he casts Angler's Web, that line AoE, he'll also create portals that fire projectiles between them, and you can't really tell which portal is going to fire into what, but you basically want to make sure you're outside of the attack range of these portals. His AoE fear also changes. On top of the circle around him, he'll spawn 4 void bullets that shoot out in an X formation based on where he's facing. You want to watch his character model or the bullets themselves to get an idea where they're going, and then dodge, otherwise you're basically dead. And the self-heal becomes even more powerful, which doesn't really matter because you should be kicking everyone anyway. All the other abilities still happen, including the shockwaves, the spittle, and spawning the egg, which is still the center of his fight. So let's get to how to do it. I'll be using the DPS perspective when talking numbers, so your situation might vary. You want to spec Bran as a healer. It pretty much feels essential, and at least during the first phase, you'll be relying on his healing potions. If your survivability is good, switch to the Porcelain Arrowhead idol for a bit more damage, but if you want to avoid getting spiked, use the idol of the Earth Mother. Since the fight is mostly about killing the egg before it hatches, it translates to dealing nearly 8 million damage within 20 seconds whenever the egg is up. Another way to put it is you need to deal around 400,000 DPS every 45 or so seconds, with the possibility of Bran not being there to help, and the high likelihood you won't be able to just stand there and blast it without interruption. I suggest hanging out at a target dummy and practicing this for a while. Take a look at your options for DPS cooldowns, talents, and maybe trinkets. Because the time between bursts is fairly short, you're going to want to rely less on trinkets or abilities with long cooldowns. Instead, maybe raise your regular or your sustained DPS and use short cooldowns if possible, even if it means spreading your cooldowns for different eggs. This is an easy example, but with Ret Paladin, their small burst comes every 30 seconds, so I adjusted a few talents to line up with it. If you're under-geared or under-experienced in my case, this is an endurance fight with many of these egg phases happening that'll wear down your long cooldowns, but as long as you can keep that minimum burst when it's needed most, the boss will die. All that's left really is to get used to the mechanics, aka practice. Confusing the spittle with the heal is going to mess you up more than a few times, so don't worry about that too much. You can see by the footage I'm using DBM to help me, but the timers are pretty useless. Meanwhile, the sound alerts were working, and that alone might help you out. I'm sure there are also plenty of weak auras out there to help you out. Anyone who's found success, feel free to share that weak aura that you used in the comments. Like I said, your interrupt routine is going to change, so be prepared to hit your defensive cooldown for spittle right away to avoid taking a tick. For other classes, it's going to take some practice if you can only cleanse every other cast and have to rely on Bran, but you'll eventually get used to this pattern and he should take care of you every other time. Other than that and getting used to the slightly faster AoE cast times, the first phase feels familiar. At 60%, the phase changes. Double check yours and Bran's health if you have the class toolkit for it. The boss doesn't take damage during this cast, so don't sweat it too much. Phase 2's pattern, if you can call it that, is just like Phase 1, with mostly fixed intervals between spittle and the egg hatching, and in between is the casting of all these abilities in a random sequence. Because of this, he actually deals less melee damage, which is a bit of a relief, because during this phase, Bran is bound to get knocked unconscious, most likely from the brown swirls which hit him for lots of damage. I advise when possible to try bringing the boss towards the middle of the room between egg phases. In my kill, the egg happened to spawn pretty close to the boss more often than not. But a big takeaway, don't feel discouraged when you find that this phase takes a while because there's a lot of running and repositioning involved. You gotta move from swirlies and dodge AoE cones and lines and run from the boss and go for the egg too, of course. Remember, 400,000 DPS for 20 seconds while dodging all of these things at once and the occasional melee swing, it's gonna feel overwhelming. But with each pull, you'll start to read the pattern that's not really a pattern. You'll notice he goes through a sequence of every ability. He won't repeat the same one twice in a row. He'll always cast spittle and spawn the egg in intervals with only a few seconds of variance. The fight you see here happened to take 10 minutes, and looking at the footage of Phase 2, I was very inefficient outside of killing the egg. I just threw what I could and tried to survive. From the looks of it, there doesn't seem to be an enrage. You can almost do no damage to the boss, but as long as you're killing the egg, you're on track to take him down, it's just a matter of time. At any time you can use DPS pots and Bloodlust to speed up the kill, but I suggest timing it after you just kicked one of his heals and you're about to start killing an egg. That way you can give yourself at least a moment of concentration to tunnel the boss. Hard mode Zekvir is harder, but the DPS requirements aren't as high as one would think. My paladin's item level was 613, but was very horribly itemized with a focus on crit and haste and almost no mastery. The flask I used basically doubled what I already had. Optimizing for your ideal stats will definitely help, and of course item level is king for surviving the melee attacks and the occasional tick of spittle. But also don't forget to pick up potions, especially during Phase 1, and prepare your defensives when you see Bran go down. That should cover about everything, and if you have more questions, feel free to comment below. Like this video if it was helpful, subscribe for more WoW coverage, catch me live, and I'll catch you later. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.